Hello, this is John from caveofprogramming.com, and this is the first in a series of tutorials on multi-threading in Java. So in this tutorial we're going to look at starting threads in Java, and next time we're going to move on to looking at basic thread synchronization. So I'm here in Eclipse and I'm going to create a new project. Let's create a new Java project, and I'll just call this threads1. And I'll give that a main class, which I'll put in a package called demo1. So let's call this just app, and I'll put it in the demo1 package. Now there are two basic ways of starting a thread in Java, and a thread is just kind of like a separate operating system process which can run concurrently with other threads. And the first way of starting a thread in Java is to extend the thread class. So let's say here class, I'll call it runner, extends thread. Now the thread class has a method called run, and I want to override that method and put some code in there. So I'm going to right click here and go to source, override implement methods, and of course I could also do this by hand, and the signature is just public void run. So I'll override that and get rid of this unnecessary stuff here. Now in run I'm going to put some code that I want to run in its own separate thread, and I'm just going to put some code in here to simulate doing some useful work. So let's have a loop. I'll say for int I equals 0, I less than 10, and I plus plus, and I'll just output here some text with a system out. I'll say sysout control space to autocomplete, and I'll say hello, and let's just add on to the loop index. Now to make this a more realistic simulation, I'll slow this loop down a bit, and I'll put in here, I'll use a static method of the thread class called sleep. And sleep pauses your program for the specified number of milliseconds. So let's just pause this for 100 milliseconds, which is 1/10 of a second. And annoyingly, thread.sleep throws an interrupted exception, or can do. I need to just handle that exception here as well to work. So to actually I need to add an instance of my class down here. I'll just call this runner1, and I'll set that equal to a new runner. And to run this code I need to type runner1 dot start, so I'm calling the start menu of the thread class. It's important not to call run, because if I call run it certainly will run my code, but it's going to run it in the main thread of the application. If I call start, that tells the thread class to go and look for the run method and to run that in its own special thread. So that's why I'm calling start here. And if I run that now, I'll see some code, and it's just running, and it's actually running in its own thread. And to prove that, copy this and have another runner 2 at the same time. So this, and you can see we've got interleaved out. So top, I've got 0, 1, 1, 2, 1 running constantly, running at the same time. The whole point of threads that you can run code simultaneously. So that's the first basic method of starting a thread in Java. The second method is to implement runnable and pass it to the constructor of the thread class. So I'll create a new main program here in its own package to demonstrate this. I'll call it app again, and I'll put it in a package called demo2. And I'm going to create a new class up here. Class, I'll call it runner again, and I'm going to say that runner implements runnable, and runnable is an interface which just has one method in it, public void run. So let's just click this error here and go to add unimplemented methods, and now I've got my public void run method there. And just as before, so this is the last lot of code, I'm going to put my code that I want to run in the public void run method. So I'll just copy that and I'll paste it in to the run method of my class that implements the runnable interface. And now to run that, I'm going to declare an instance of the thread class. I'll call it T1, and I'll set that equal to a new thread, and I'll pass an instance of my runner class here to the constructor. And the quickest way to do that is just to say new runner. And to show that I can get code running at the same time, I'm going to have two of those. Let's just copy that, and I'll have T2. And now to actually make the code run, I need to call T1.start and of course T2.start. And if I run that now, we're going to see the same thing again down here. Let's just maximize this editor and run it. So I've got interleaved output once again, and both threads of code are running at the same time. Now sometimes you just want to run like one method in its own thread, and it seems like a lot of hassle to create a whole separate class. And there is just like a quick way that we can do either of these things really, and I'll just demonstrate that here. So this isn't a new way of running a thread, it's just a technique using an anonymous class that comes in handy sometimes. And let's put this in a package called demo3 and get rid of this stuff. So to run just a little bit of code, you can do something like this. I'll say thread T1, let's say, equals new thread. And here inside the constructor brackets of the thread class, I can say new runnable round brackets, just as I was trying to create an instance of a class called runnable, which I'm not. But if I open a bracket here, and Eclipse has put in the closing bracket here, now I can implement the public void run method right here. So and in there I can put the code that I want to run. So let's just copy this code again, Control C, and paste that in there. And of course, once again, I mustn't forget to call thread.start, so T1.start. And if I run that, once again, we've got code running in its own thread. So that's basically it for this tutorial. There is another way of creating threads using executor services if you want your threads to be in a thread pool. And we're going to look at that in subsequent tutorials, but these are two basic methods. And this question comes up a lot in job interviews and on exams. What are the two basic methods of creating a thread in Java? And that's the answer: extend the thread class or implement runnable and pass it to the constructor of the thread class. In the next tutorial, we're going to start looking at some basic thread synchronization techniques, and we're going to look at the problems that can occur if you have two threads simultaneously accessing a shared variable or some shared data, and we'll look at what to do about that, or at least we'll start to look at it. So join me again next time, and you can find this code on caveofprogramming.com. And until next time, happy coding.